If you'd like to open up your Bibles to Proverbs and mark that book, that's where we're going to be tonight, doing a Proverbs overview. And I'll tell you that we've got Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon left, and Jeremiah if I decide to do it. But here's the thing about that. I skipped Jeremiah because I said at the time, I don't know, well, at the time, and even still now, I'm not ready to do Jeremiah. But Jeremiah is something that I will be getting ready for because I'm going to be teaching Jeremiah in the fourth quarter of next year. So maybe I'll get to it sooner than that. But Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. That's what's coming for now. And we'll see if Jeremiah makes an appearance. Tonight is Proverbs. And when I think about Proverbs, I'm not sure that I can say this. I tell you this all the time. My favorite thing is whatever I'm studying at the moment, normally. It's what I like the most. But I think through the years, Proverbs has probably been my favorite book of the Bible. It's my favorite concept, anyway, of what's going on with this book. And rather than trying to give a definition of a proverb, it's probably best just to throw some examples up for you to see of what proverbs are. This is what a proverb is. It's a short little saying that imparts wisdom to the hearer. I've got some definitions, but I don't really like any of these definitions. Listen to this one. This is a Webster Dictionary definition of a proverb. A brief, popular epigram or maxim. Well, now I need definitions for two of the words in the definition. That's not useful for me. A saying which illuminates by comparing things. That's true. A proverb does that. It's like, this is like this. But not all proverbs are comparison related. I don't like that definition for that reason. I've got 4 definitions up here, and I don't really like any of them. The best way to say what is a proverb and what are we looking at when we look at the Proverbs, I think, is just by taking a look at some examples of Proverbs that you will have surely heard some of these things. I've got something else to offer you here in just a second about a proverb, but I think before we talk about what is a proverb and what is the Book of Proverbs, I think we have to talk about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Because if we're going to talk about the Book of Proverbs, one of the things that I'm going to really emphasize to go through this book over and over again is that this is a book that shares wisdom with people. Wisdom is not the same thing as knowledge. Knowledge is information, facts and figures. And I will tell you this, like I look at Luke sometimes in the school that he's doing, the classes that he's in. At this point, Luke's a junior in high school. At this point, he is way smarter than I ever was and probably ever will be in terms of information. The math classes that he's in, sometimes I'll look at the homework that he's doing and I'm just like, good luck. Call Jesse. Jesse can help you with your homework. That's not for me. Knowledge is information. You know things. 2 + 2 is 4, and you know information. That's a very different thing, though, from wisdom. Wisdom is knowing what to do with that information. In fact, I will show you this because I like this a lot. Look at Exodus chapter 28. The word wisdom sometimes in the Bible is translated as skill or ability. And so a person who is wise is a person who has skill or a person who is wise is somebody who has ability. And I think that's really useful to understand this. Look at chapter 28 and verse 3. God is saying here, this is how you're going to build the tabernacle, and these are the people who are going to do different things. And this is one example. You see examples of this all throughout the tabernacle thing, but just one example here. Chapter 28 and verse 3. You shall speak to all the skillful whom I have filled with a spirit of skill. You could do wisdom there. That's the same word. Speak to the wise who I filled with wisdom. But skill is the concept here. Speak to the skillful whom I have filled with a spirit of skill, that they may make Aaron's garments to consecrate him for my priesthood. And so, we're going to make Aaron's garments. If you hand me some fabric and a needle and some thread, I can probably thread the needle around the fabric with a head hole that goes over my body, and it's tied together on the side. Like, I could probably do that for you. Maybe. Probably I could do that for you. But there's a different situation, though, for somebody who is skilled at doing something like that, right? Somebody who actually knows how to make clothes, and somebody in this situation who can make beautiful clothes fit for the high priest of Israel. That's somebody that you need skill and ability to accomplish that task. That's the word wisdom here. And now, if you think about wisdom, this is one of the ways that it's described. In the realm of moral living, wisdom refers to skill in living. Skill in living one's life with moral skills so that something of lasting value is produced from one's life. And that is, wisdom is being skilled or having the ability to live a godly life in the way that you can accomplish the best outcome desirable, possible. That's what wisdom is. Here's a couple things that I think Luke might have taught me this one. Knowledge is knowing what to say. Wisdom is knowing whether or not you should say it. Right? So knowledge is, I know what to say right now, but the person who's lived for a while and probably experienced things the hard way says, just because I know what to say doesn't mean it's always the best thing to say at this moment. Wisdom is the skill of knowing what to do with it. Or this is the Jurassic Park thing. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Information is can. I can do this. Wisdom is, that's probably not the best idea. Look at 1 Kings chapter 3. And with these two passages that I'm going to throw up here, I've got them on the board for you right there. I don't actually have the verses, but I put the references down so you can write those. This is what I would do. Since most of Proverbs is attributed to Solomon, I would put these two verses somewhere right up at the top of your page so you can remember this. If we're going to be talking about Proverbs as a book of wisdom, Proverbs that are sayings of wisdom about how to live a skillful life, how to live with ability to live a good life, it's probably not a bad idea to remember Solomon's credentials. So let's see, 1 Kings chapter 3 and verses 5 through 12. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give you. And Solomon said, you have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father, although I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in, and your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this your great people? God said to Solomon, Ask me for anything. And Solomon said, I don't know what I don't know. Give me wisdom. Give me a heart of discernment to know right and wrong, to do the right thing. And that was the right thing to ask for. In verse 10, it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And God said to him, because you have asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I have given you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. Now that's important to me in this conversation because, let me get my Bible open here to Proverbs. As I get ready to read through Proverbs, a book about wise and skillful living, to have the ability to live a good life, I'm coming at this book knowing that at least the Proverbs of Solomon are written by somebody granted with a divine measure. God has said to this man, I'm going to give you wisdom like nobody else has ever had before. And so when you read the book of Proverbs, you have an opportunity to have that. You have the opportunity to understand this divine level of wisdom that God blessed Solomon with, because he wrote it down and I can learn it and put it into practice in my life. Look at chapter 4, 1 Kings chapter 4, and verses 29 through 34. God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure and breadth of mind, like the sand of the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan. And you see also Heman is mentioned next. I assume those are the Ethan and the Heman who were involved in the Psalms that we talked about last Sunday night. Some of these other people are listed. Verse 32, he spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. That is an exciting start for me, because when you think about, wow, what must that have been like for God to have put inside of you the ability to know the right thing to do in all circumstances. Wow, wouldn't that have been awesome? Guess what? It's right there in the book, and we have the ability to read it and learn it and do it. That's awesome. That's a really impressive thing if you think about it. I like this one. This is just a quote from a book on Proverbs. At its simplest, wisdom is skillfulness in dealing with the matter at hand so as to get the best results. In Proverbs, the matter at hand is life itself, and the best result is the good, harmonious, and successful life. So for men to know wisdom is for them to have the skill needed to make a success of their lives. And the reason why I highlighted the word success is because when you're talking about the Bible, biblical godly success is not the same thing as what people in the world would say is a successful life. Somebody out there would define, I have a successful life, and I would look at it and say, no thank you. I'm talking about biblical godliness and success in the eyes of God. That's what Proverbs is going to teach us how to do. And so I threw this up here real quick. It's a list. It's not a comprehensive list, but it's a list of everything that I could fit with a reasonable font on one screen to just give you a taste of what Proverbs is going to talk about. How do I have a successful life? And you know, this is true for all of us, but I would especially say, young people, this is a gold mine. Like, to look at the kind of person you want to be, the kind of person that you need to be, There's a lot of stuff in here that's just good, reasonable stuff. Telling the truth, being a kind person, being a patient person, controlling your temper. These are the kinds of lessons that you get from Proverbs. Look at chapter 1 and verse 7. This is going to be as good of an overriding definition of Proverbs as I think that we can find. We can find it in the 2 verses that I listed there. Only read 1 and verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The beginning of knowledge, the very beginning of knowledge is to fear God. And you might be the smartest genius in terms of information that the world has ever known. And if you have no fear of God, you're not going to make any progress down the road of the kind of successful, godly life that we're learning about in the book of Proverbs. And so that's going to be one of the things. If you highlight in your Bible, chapter 1 and verse 7 would be a worthy highlight. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. They are just not interested in any of this. Here's what I'd like to do for, I think, the main chunk of this lesson. As you read through Proverbs, it's going to feel like 31 chapters of boom, 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 boom. Like it's a lot all at one time. But there is some structure to it. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you some structure. And a lot of these things are going to be general. Don't take this stuff to the bank and say, this is always the case in this section. It doesn't work like that. But for the most part, I can give you some guidelines. Look at chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And so from chapter 1 all the way through chapter 9 and verse 18, we're going to be hearing Proverbs of Solomon. And the neat thing about this section is, in verses 2 through 6, he starts by saying, at least in this collection of Proverbs of Solomon, this is what I'm trying to accomplish right now. This is what I want you to know. Verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing. How do I deal wisely in the world? How do I behave? The word instruction here is sometimes treated as discipline in the Bible. To receive instruction in wise dealing in righteousness, justice, and equity. To give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. You know that discretion thing? Just because you know what to say doesn't mean you're wise. Knowing whether or not you should say it, that's discretion. That's wisdom. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. I think the main takeaway from that verse 5, let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. The wise person is the one who knows that they don't know everything. The wise person is the one who's going to be open-minded, open-hearted to say, maybe there's something that you can offer me about wise living, righteousness, justice, equity. Because the wise person knows, I don't know everything. Verse 6, in order to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. Flip through. Look, in my Bible, ESV, I have a heading over verse 8. It's called the Enticement of Sinners. And you'll see that section, verse 8 through 19, it's a pretty long section, and it's unified. Like here is a pretty long story. Not all of Proverbs is going to be like that. Look at chapter 1, verse 20 through 33. Now we're going to talk about wisdom, and it's a longer section. And so this chapter 1 and verse 1 through 9:18 Proverbs of Solomon is going to be longer speeches and longer sections. There's going to be a lot about wisdom. It talks about wisdom as if she is a person, and you say, here is wisdom, she is a person. Where can I find her? I want to discover this person. And so that's what you're going to see throughout this section. The next section, look at chapter 10 and verse 1. The next section is also by Solomon. It says in chapter 10 and verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon. But it says the Proverbs of Solomon because now we're getting ready to enter into a new stage of the book where there's not long sections and speeches anymore like the stuff that we have already talked about. In this section, this is going to be like the main section that I think of when I think of the book of Proverbs. There are, careful, I see some of you writing this stuff down. I didn't go through this section and actually count all of these myself. I read somebody else who said that these numbers are true, so take it with a grain of salt. They say there are 375 different proverbs within chapter 10 through 22. They're disconnected, like this proverb. Well, look, chapter 10 and verse 2. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. Well, both of those things talk about righteousness and wickedness, but they're really two different proverbs dealing with two different things. And so this is just 375 two-line sections of, here's a bit of wisdom. Here's how to live your life well. And I just... 375. You would almost be able to take one of these a year and just say, today, this is the one I'm going to think about. I'm going to think about how to put this piece of wisdom into my life. There's one exception. I've got it on the board for you there that has 3 lines instead of 2. But one of the things that you might notice about this section, chapter 10 through 22, almost all of these proverbs are in the indicative mood, which I know you're like, okay, indicative mood, who cares about that? Think of it like this. Indicative mood means to indicate something. This is a truth. I am indicating a truth to you. And so it's just a statement of fact in this section. And here are some of the examples of what you're going to find throughout this main section. I don't expect you to read through all of these, but the reason why I added this slide is because sometimes people say, hey, can I have your slides later on? And I can email it, and you can go through and look at this way. I told you about the indicative mood, though, because in the next section, look at chapter 22, Proverbs 22 and verse 17. This is going to start a new section. And we're going to call this one the words of the wise. The heading in my Bible calls this the words of the wise. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise. So Proverbs, the first section. Proverbs of Solomon, longer sections, longer speeches. The second section of Proverbs, Proverbs of Solomon, but 2-liners. Little pieces of wisdom, totally disconnected. 375 of them, I think. Now what we're going to do in verse 17 is we're going to hear the words of the wise. And these are just wise sayings that somebody has collected and put into this section. And the reason why I did the indicative mood thing right here, these in the second section are just statements of fact. In this section, these are in the imperative mood, which means command. And so this is not just statements of fact. This is do this thing or don't do this thing. That's what the imperative mood is going to do. And so look at verse 17. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise and apply your heart to my knowledge. For it will be pleasant if you keep them within you, if all of them are ready on your lips, that your trust may be in the Lord. I have made them known to you today, even to you. Have I not written for you 30 sayings of counsel and knowledge, to make you know what is right and true, that you may give a true answer to those who sent you? Verse 22. Do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. That's not a statement of fact. That is a, you better not do this. And so this section is filled with basically commands. If you want to have a good life, a successful, godly life, then these are the kinds of things that you need to do. And here's some examples of what you're going to find throughout that section. Okay, let's see, where are we? 24 and verse 23, I'm not entirely sure what to do with this. I just called it more words of the wise. Verse 23, these also are sayings of the wise. And I can't really tell you, like, maybe this is just one section. It kind of seems like it's broken up into another section, but I don't see any difference between one or the other. You can treat it as a new section or not. I don't care on that one. Chapter 25 and verse 1. This one's interesting because you say, surely somebody's sitting there thinking to themselves, hey, a minute ago you said somebody collected these wise words and put them together in the Book of Solomon. Look at 25 and verse 1. You at least have one indication of how that happened. Chapter 25 and verse 1. These also are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. And so Hezekiah restored worship in Judah to what David had originally set forth for the people of God. And part of him saying, let's worship God in the way that God wants us to worship. Let's tear down the idols. Let's not do this kind of stuff. He said, hey, Solomon had some wisdom. You guys go out and collect that wisdom and put it together in a book. And at least part of what they accomplished is right here for us right now. And so you have more Proverbs of Solomon. This, especially in the first section of this. Do you remember what we read a minute ago in 1 Kings chapter 4 about how Solomon wrote a lot about plants and animals and birds and insects? You remember that? He was wise and he knew all of these things. Especially in the first half of this section, that's where you're going to find all the animal and plant stuff. That's where you're going to find, just look at some of these examples and you'll see several of these things about this is what I see in nature. And so let's see. Chapter 26 and verse 2, it's where I put my finger down. Like a sparrow in its flitting, like a swallow in its flying, a curse that is causeless does not alight. You see a lot of the nature stuff in those sections. Look at chapter 30 and verse 1. The book of Proverbs ends with a couple of guys. So chapter 30 and verse 1 says the words of Aguer, the son of Jacob. And here is some wisdom from somebody named Aguer. And your question is, who is Aguer? And my answer is, I have no idea. But he wrote some Proverbs, and God saw fit to put them into the Bible. And then chapter 31, this is the last chapter. Chapter 31 in verse 1 says, the words of King Lemuel. And you say, okay, so the last section is from a guy named King Lemuel. No, that's not right. The words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. So Solomon starts off by writing Proverbs, and it's as if he's writing to his son to say, son, listen to me and live your life in this way. The last chapter is a mom writing to her son who's a king. Don't know who Lemuel is, don't know who his mom is, but here are the words of the mom, and she tells him, this is some stuff that I want to tell you about. And so she says, remain sexually pure, basically. She talks to him about alcohol, sobriety. She talks to him about justice. And then starting in verse 10, you will recognize this poem, I think, she talks to him, this king's mom talks to him about the kind of woman that he needs to look for in order to marry. And so this is the poem of the virtuous wife. And one of the things, if your Bible doesn't indicate this, I call it the poem of the virtuous wife because each line starts with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's an acrostic poem. And so every line, if it was English, the first line would start with A. A beautiful wife. That's where my head goes. A godly wife is what you need to find. The next line starts with B. This is my impromptu poetry, all right? So give me some slack here. But do not look for a woman like this. That's all you get from me. That's basically the structure of Proverbs. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's probably not accidental. I didn't count ahead of time. 7 major sections of collections of wisdom and how to live a godly and good life. And, this is an overview of Proverbs, not actually a dive into the book of Proverbs. I don't know anybody who does not love this book. Just read one and let it simmer for a day. And if you do what you learn, you'll be wiser and better off for it. Each one of these book overviews ends with a discussion of Jesus. And so we're going to finish with that also. I think that if you want to talk about Solomon as the wisest man who ever was, who provided the world with what they needed, you would have to say, Solomon, the wisest man who ever was, except for Jesus. Look at Matthew chapter 12, starting in verse 38. Some of the scribes and Pharisees answered Jesus, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. But he answered them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. That language right there, that's Proverbs-like language. Jesus doesn't say, you're going to kill me and bury me and put me in the grave, and I'm going to be in the grave for 3 days, and then I'm going to come back to life. He frames it like a proverb so that the wise will seek it out to understand, and everybody else will over their head. 41. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation to condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. The book of Proverbs is awesome because you can read about the wisdom of God for how to live a godly life. But the words of Jesus that he taught and that he equipped his apostles to share that we read about in the New Testament, that's even better than the wisdom of Solomon. Because that's where we learn about Christianity and godly living and who we're supposed to be here and now. There's one last thing that I want to do. It kind of goes with the Jesus and the New Testament conversation, but it's one little piece about wisdom. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and then this will be the last thing that I do for this conversation. 1 Corinthians 1, and I'm going to start reading in verse 18, and I'm going to go down to the end of the chapter. But one of the wise things that Jesus said that we probably should pay attention to, you're going to see the wisdom of God. And when you see the wisdom of God, you're going to want to go out and you're going to want to tell the world about the wisdom of God. But what Paul tells us is, when the world sees the wisdom of God, they think it's stupid. They don't think it's wisdom. They don't understand the wisdom of it. It's foolishness to them. Completely bonkers. Look at chapter 1 and verse 18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. You want to talk about our Messiah, the one that we have completely devoted our lives to? Oh yeah, the Romans arrested him and nailed him to a cross and let him suffocate to death. And the world's going to look at us and say, that sounds like a good idea to you? To the world, it's folly. The cross is foolishness to them. It's folly to them. But to us who understand, it is the power of God. 19. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men. Even when God, this is hypothetical. Even when God is being foolish and petty and small, the foolishness of God far surpasses even the wisdom of the wisest man. And this is the way that he saw fit to accomplish our salvation. The weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. He says to this group of people, listen, the world doesn't look at this group of people and think, wow, there are the leaders of the world. Not many wise according to worldly standards. Not many powerful. Not many of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. We don't boast in how smart we are, or even in the wisdom conversation. We don't boast in how wise we may happen to be. We boast in what God has created through Jesus, because it is not our wisdom or the wisdom of the world that we're boasting in. It is the wisdom of the creator of the universe. You can't go wrong with that, even if the world rolls their eyes and thinks it's silly. And so here is my one-sentence summary. Becky was really giving me a hard time about my one-sentence summaries lately. She said, your one sentences are turning into multiple sentences, and last week you had a quote from a book as a one-sentence summary, and so I did better this week. The Book of Proverbs is a collection of wisdom, practical living, wisdom sayings for godly living. And so I would invite you to dive into that. It'll be fun, and we'll be better off for it. If you're here tonight and you're not a Christian and you're able to have eyes to see and ears to hear that God has put his wisdom on full display in Jesus and the one who hands his life over to him as the Messiah, we're here to help you with that tonight. Come forward, make your needs known as we sing the invitation song.